Well, hi everybody. Welcome, low ego action heroes, to the Delta CX live stream podcast. I am your friend Debbie Levitt from Delta CX, and today is Monday, August 24, in the year 2020. I don't know how that happened. It's like almost Christmas already. Where is the time going? And today we have a super special guest that I want to introduce to you, and our topic is going to be establishing CX and UX's seat at the table. And I know this is a real burning concern for so many of us. So I hope you'll be joining live and asking your questions. I'll be monitoring the chat room, so feel free to ask away. And on that note, let's bring in our guest. And Elisa, would you please spell your name for those listening on the audio only version and introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hi, Deb. Thanks for having me. So spelling my name. So it's spelled Elisa. Do you have a surname as well, Deb?
Please, because then they can
D-E-L.
find you
Yep.
everywhere.
Oh, okay. Yep. D-E-L, and that's a small D-E-L, and then there's a space, and then it's a capital G-A-L-D-O. Sorry, it's a little bit of a confusing name, but it was the one they gave me.
It's good.
Yeah. So just, I guess, a little bit about myself. So Deb and I have been talking quite a lot together about, what we've done and where we've been and all sorts of stuff. And I guess I started doing this over 3 decades ago. I have been mostly based in Europe for most of my career, but have worked all over the world. I have remained a UX researcher and designer throughout that time, and have moved into developing teams, fixing dysfunctional teams, mentoring people, just creating bigger teams, helping them integrate within big and small organizations. I've worked across lots of different industries and specialized in at different points in my career, because it's been 3 decades. So at one point I was doing a lot of internationalization and localization. Another point I was doing a lot of speech and language understanding and designing interfaces for speech and speech recognition and speech understanding. And more recently, so the last 7-8 years, I have been doing almost exclusively working in pharmaceuticals and healthcare. So a kind of, again, another shift, which a lot of people think doesn't make sense. But if you look at my LinkedIn, you'll see that my first degree is in biology, so it makes a little bit more sense, I guess. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, I guess. It's kind of hard to put 30 years into a minute or two, but sort of done, quite a lot of different things over that time, but mostly working more in sort of fixing dysfunctional teams, developing teams, mentoring people, and that kind of thing.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining in and for your fantastic background. And we already have some people saying hello. Hello to Kleber, who I believe is in Peru, a friend of the show who joins in sometimes. And so, guys, get your questions ready. So, man, where do we even start? You've probably had some experience, since you've dealt with dysfunctional teams and dysfunctional organizations, with teams, companies, departments who just didn't understand what UX even did and why they were there. They probably were not utilized well. Can you think of some tales from days of old and some things you were able to do that were able to shift that? Because we're looking for any actionable advice we can give the audience.
Yeah, I guess so. Just to start out maybe with a couple different scenarios. So when I first started working, I worked at the company where the people sort of coined the word usability. So it was very new. We're talking mid-80s. And we really connected. We were working sort of more client side, so not as consultancy, but we really connected with the people who were developing the software. And that really worked for us in that situation. We also did things where we created what we called usability metrics, which was about taking the more qualitative types of insights that we had found that were delivering implications for design, but actually putting metrics on them, because that's what the people we were working with understood and felt comfortable with. So there have been other, situations where just working at the more bottom end, where you're actually doing the work, doesn't work. You have to work from the top. and that you have to get, what we would call an executive sponsor, or someone who has the gravitas to say, this is what we're doing. And so it usually works really well from the top and from the bottom. And I'm kind of saying that quite metaphorically. But where you tend to have more problems is in that middle layer where you kind of sit normally, so there is the competing teams. And so what we see a lot is that people feel a little bit threatened by what we do. It kind of sounds like marketing. It kind of sounds like the creative team. It kind of, and so people feel a little bit threatened by that. And so it's about getting them to understand, really what you do. And that's very hard to do. And the best way to do it is to show them and to bring them with you. So if you want them to understand what you're doing, say in evaluation and testing, bring them into the observation room, make them understand what you do. If you want them to actually understand why it's not just drawing a picture, it's also about, how did I get from these insights to understand what were the implications and how that impacted my decisions about design. And then when I talk about some of the fundamental things that I know about design that also drove my decisions. So it's about bringing them through that process. And we often talk about, and someone who used to work for me a very long time ago said this in a meeting, and I thought it was quite profound. She said, what people don't understand is that we're 80% heads and 20% hands. And so what you have to do is bring them with you in that 80%, because all they see is the 20% and they don't get that. So it's about bringing people with you, bringing them into meetings. Actually let them sit by your shoulder and watch you, but you have to think out loud. We originally talked about, making people think out loud so we could understand what their problems were. That's kind of what you have to do with people that you're trying to I want to say indoctrinate, but really it's really just understand your value and what you're bringing and how you're different from what they do.
And we've got, let's see, we've got Suresh saying hello. We have Paul saying, Elisa, language acquisition study, you? That's from Paul Edwards. I don't know why. And up-and-coming UX low ego action hero Elijah is here, and he says, hello, been a while since I was able to catch one of these. Great insights Elisa is sharing with us today. Thank you. So when I think about people saying, I wish that we could bring stakeholders in to observe more or be more involved, I find sometimes people go overboard on that, at least in my opinion, and they say, well, let's get these stakeholders into a design workshop. Let's have them sketching their ideas, or maybe they want to ask customers a few questions. Where do you kind of draw the line between bringing them in and exposing them to what we do versus kind of over-involving them or undoing ourselves?
So I think it partly depends on what industry you're working in. So most recently I've been working in pharma and healthcare. So we are working within a therapeutic area. We're working with certain types of drugs. We have to understand those. That takes a lot of stakeholders that understand the medical side, and more the kind of compliance side of what you can do and what you can't do. So it has to be very collaborative. What you can say, what you can say, what you can do, what you can't do. So in that situation, I would say it's really good when you come up with some of your ideas about what these solutions might be, that you have almost like a sounding board that you bring them to, and they can say, well, you can't actually do that because compliance won't allow you to do that. Medical and legal regulations say absolutely not. But I think you have to be careful about how much effort you spend on bringing people who aren't designers, who don't really understand how insight works, and that it's not a one-to-one translation between this is my insight, this is my solution, or this is my insight, this is my challenge. It's because there's so much thinking that goes around shaping what is the actual problem you're trying to solve and what's the right solution. Because very often, sometimes we found in work that we've done is that we're focusing on one type of nurse because they have particular problems in delivering in their job, but the solution wasn't actually for that nurse. The solution was for a different type of nurse because by giving a different nurse a different service, that actually changed things. So it's that broader kind of thinking that you do. And so in that case, it's really good to have more expertise and more stakeholders in the room. But lots of times it becomes what I would call a churn fest. It's like everybody's got these great ideas, but they don't really understand design. They don't understand how design works. They don't understand, the foundations of how you design things, whether it be a website, a mobile app, a service, or, and even when you're working with people who know a little bit about design, it can be quite challenging to do that. So I think those sessions are more about bringing people with you as opposed to getting people who aren't designers to design, and making them feel part of the process, and making them feel like, you haven't just made a decision, but you're walking them through that process with you. Because we've talked about design thinking sessions before, and I was very lucky. I was invited by a client to go to another vendor's design thinking session. I think it was 2.5 or 3 days. And really, the work that we did in that 2.5, 3 days with probably close to 50 people across 2 locations across the Atlantic. My team and the front-end development team had already worked together to recognize what those problems were, and already came up with the same solutions that came up with that meeting, because they were the same ones, because it was the same problem. So it's really about understanding, is this a sales exercise or a marketing exercise, or is this actually a design exercise? What's the purpose? And I think there are different things that you can do to get that result that you want, but not actually have to tell people that they're designers too.
Yeah, that hurts just hearing it, but I feel ya. So when I think about some of the things that, when I think about not having a seat at the table and some of the dysfunctional issues that UX deals with at jobs, I can't help but think of Agile. And some of the downsides of various flavors of Agile processes. In your adventures, have you had any occasion to influence how Agile was done or implemented to try to shine a better light on UX?
So I had a great experience. I spent about a year with a client, kind of trying to fix a what was thought to be a dysfunctional UX team. Some talented people, but not really working well. But it became very clear that the other capabilities weren't working very well either. And the crux of a lot of it was where the insight was coming in and ending and not being passed over, who was supposed to be doing what task. And so it all became very contentious. But the heart of it was this idea about doing things agile. And you had, one team, the UX team, that wanted the insight, wanted to be able to test what they were doing. On the other hand, there was no time to do that. And that in this instance, they were trying to take 9 products and put them under one umbrella. And what they hadn't done is taken the time to actually do the UX strategy for this product, this eventual product of 9. So what they hadn't done is sat back and said, here's what we're going to do. Here's the strategy. These are how these things are going to be connected. Here's what we're going to do when 2 products or 3 products have the same functionality, but to a different database. How are we going to manage this? So they didn't actually do that first. And so the speed of the agile sort of development was just moving on. It just kept moving.
Just build something.
It was just build something. There was no coherence between the modules, because there was no style guide. There was none of that foundational structure that you need, to actually be successful. So it just became this big, upset stomach of, stuff, and people being really quite angry. And so the simple thing that I did for them is I actually kind of drew a big picture for them, or a big schematic it was, kind of an infographic type of thing about how Agile works and why that doesn't work with designing on the fly, because you can't do that kind of work, within that 1 week or 2 week period. So everybody's always trying to play catch up. Everything gets thrown out. Everybody's frustrated. And in the end, it was really quite interesting, because what we were able to show them is where all of these bottlenecks and problems were happening. So they ended up hiring some more people to be able to actually put in all the style guides and all the templates, so there was consistency. We eventually got the strategy team to start delivering some research and insight that they had that they weren't actually delivering, starting to work a little bit more collaborating with the analysts. So it was really about stripping everything bare and then putting it back together and understanding who needs to be doing what and how that process flows and where Agile fits. Because the Agile was actually just a portion, not a small portion, but a portion of what they were doing. And so, but that's what everybody was focusing on. So all of the stuff that comes before that wasn't happening. And they were just trying to, in 2 weeks, sprints, they're trying to get everything done that should have been done beforehand, and nothing matched up. So it's quite difficult to do. I mean, I probably spent a couple months trying to detangle it. But it was very interesting when I showed them the picture. They were like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's what it looks like, and this is what it's supposed to look like. So it does take a while to do that, and obviously every situation is different. So working in pharma, we don't very often do things agile. They can be agile in development, but they're not agile in the design process, because you have to have, there's so many medical and legal regulations.
You have to have it figured out up front.
Well, it's all of the, when you're doing research, you can't sort of do it quite quickly, because it takes several weeks to get approval for your protocol, and then it takes a couple of weeks to recruit people. So it's not agile at all. So we tend to do bigger, less rounds than you would in a kind of a more, say, if it was an e-commerce type of, site or service. So it's slightly different.
So this show is not sponsored, so we're just going to take a few seconds to quickly plug my company.
Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.
And also, please remember that I'm hoping everybody will subscribe and ring the bell here on the YouTube channel. If you're watching or listening on LinkedIn, come on over to YouTube. The stream is much faster, and the comments are more like a conversation. LinkedIn is sometimes 2 or 3 minutes behind. And also remember, I've got a Slack channel, a Slack workspace that is completely free to join, and I am there if you have any questions or comments or something that's on your mind. deltacx.link, which is my URL shortener, /join Slack, and it is completely free of charge. All of you low ego action heroes are welcome there, and I hope to see you there. So of course, if you want to support what I do, please subscribe, press like on videos, tell algorithms you like me. That is the best way to go. And you have some new fans in the chat room. Paul Edwards apologizes for what he said before, but he said, oh my God, I'm listening very closely. You're making such excellent points. How did you guys meet? And all of a sudden, I am not totally sure how we met. Was it through Giles, or how did we collide?
It's through Giles. Is Giles online?
I don't know if he is. I didn't specifically drag him into this, but I think it was with Dr. Giles, who we had on an episode like 30-something talking about clinical UX, and I think he had recommended that we connect. So thank you to Dr. Giles. And Anish wrote, people take design sprints as a shortcut to get things done. Do you have any comments you'd like to make on design sprints?
Design sprints. I think, how to say it?
You can say anything here.
Shortcuts. Okay, I'm trying to be careful. I'll try.
You don't have to be careful.
Too careful. Okay. Everyone looks for shortcuts. Everyone. And, as UX people, we tend to be slightly different animals. One way, we're feedback junkies. Most people don't care what other people think. We really do. That's quite different than a lot of people. A lot of people are like, nope, this is it. I'm done. They're very confident. They don't need any feedback.
My idea is the best.
Exactly. And very often I hear the problem with UX is it's too academic, and it takes too long. No, no, no. You need to understand. If we were doing this academically, we'd be working on this for like 2 years. It's like we're only working on it for 2 months. Um, but the difference is that everything that I do and my team when I was still working with Attitude, it was based in academic of design and research. And you use that to be able to say, okay, I'm going to take a shortcut here because I think I can do that because I understand the risks, and I also understand the indicators that will tell me I need to do a bit more work because something isn't right here. So I've taken the risk. It hasn't panned out. I need to do more. But it's about knowing where you can push those boundaries. Things like when you're doing research and you want to do a smaller sample. Well, if your population is small and not very diverse, then you can do that because you understand that the risk is less. If you have a huge population and they are quite diverse, then that's a big risk. But you can also, because you have that academic foundation, you can do things like, okay, I'm going to do my big study in 2 countries, and then what I'm going to do is I am going to do a more quant study and see if I can validate some of those sorry, some messages just came up and distracted me, sorry. But use the more quant kind of research to validate the findings or not in the other 2 or 3 countries or 1 country. So you can do different things to kind of make things quicker or less expensive. Or you can, I've done studies across, in 14 sites, I don't know, 10 different countries, all different languages, big budgets. But I've also done it the other way. But it's because you understand what the risk is in doing it different ways. Design sprints, they can be great if you've mapped out everything you want to do and you actually understand the foundation. It's a bit like I have designed my house. I know exactly where everything's going to go. And now I'm just going to, I'm going to set these guys off. They're going to build this bit of the house. They're going to build that bit of the house, and it's all going to join up. But if you don't do that work before you start all of that, very often the ends don't meet up. It's like sort of building a bridge from either end. If you don't do it properly, it doesn't meet up. But it's more about understanding the risk that you're taking. Is this just going to be a quick thing? We're going to throw it out there, see if it works. We'll do it really quickly. If it's more in an investment, then I think you have to really think about how you approach that. In that, what is the risk of doing it quick, agile, not a lot of thinking, as opposed to the full-blown kind of research, prototyping, concepting, all the way through to usability testing, all the way through to the end. So it's just each circumstance is different. I often get people sort of tease me because they ask me a question and my answer is always, it depends.
It depends.
It depends. And it really, everything we do is so context specific that I think that probably drives people crazy because they want to be able to sell the same thing over and over again. And we do the same thing, but how you design what you do is very different depending on, what the context is.
And we've got some questions popping up in the chat room, but I've got one I want to ask before we move over to the questions from Elijah and Lucas, and thanks for asking those. My question is, when I think about some of the dysfunction that we run into on teams and at companies, I wonder if earlier in the process establishing team charters or some sort of documentation where we take a look at team roles and boundaries, because some of the dysfunction can sometimes be not knowing what you're doing, or everybody thinks they're interviewing the user, or everybody thinks they're sketching the screens. Have you ever implemented this type of document, and what are your suggestions of what might go in it?
So I've never done any document like that. We have done quite a lot of work around who does what and where the boundaries are. That's very hard to keep to. But what I would say is that the most important thing in any team that's working together is respect. And when that respect breaks down, it's like you can be from a different capability and you can have an opinion, but I'm the expert in this, or you're the expert in that, and I can have an opinion, and it may not, hold. So it's really about a team that comes together, that trusts each other and respects each other, and respects that each of those people comes with a different set of expertise, and that, and I guess putting down those boundaries is kind of important, because I think a lot of people don't know what they don't know. I'm sounding a little bit
I
like
agree.
famous American at the moment. And so they say, oh yeah, I'll do the research. I can write the protocol. I can do that. And then you look at it and you think, what were you thinking? And now how do I get into a position where I'm saying,
Hey, that was crap.
actually it's crap. Or, oh, I'd like to do the moderating, on this usability test. And I love the enthusiasm, but what happens very quickly is that they realize it's actually quite hard. It's actually quite a difficult thing to do. So the enthusiasm is great, but it's really respecting and understanding that each person on that team comes with a really, hard-earned set of skills, and it's respecting that. And so if you don't have that, then the team falls apart, and it just gets led by one person. And obviously there has to be a leader, but you don't have a multidisciplinary team because you only want to listen to one person.
Great points. Thank you. Thank you. So now I'm going to shift to some of the questions in the chat room. Elijah is an up-and-coming entry-level UX person, and he is wondering, how should he position himself in the company? Should he try to get a seat at the table, or should he be more active or more passive?
Okay. So can I get an idea of how big the company is?
I'm not sure if he has his first job yet. I think he's just out of a boot camp.
Is this right.
I think this is more of a hypothetical. Yeah, more of a hypothetical.
Okay.
If you are an entry-level UXer in your first job, would you expect that you have a seat at the table, or is it better for you as an entry-level person to be maybe more passive or more of an observer, or something else?
I don't think you should be passive. Depending on what level you come in at. If you come in at board level, then you're definitely not passive. If you come in as entry level, just came out of school, what you really want to do is you want to do great work, and you want to bring people with you, because your colleagues who maybe are in different disciplines who you are working with, 3 years time, they're going to be your colleagues that you're working with, and you want to actually have this cohort of people who do different things, but who get it. So you bring them with you. You explain what you do. You work collaboratively. You show them what you do. You insist, things like, we really need to test this. You push the boundaries as much as you can. I know a lot of people who've worked for me, from an entry level, have done quite a lot of, writing papers, writing internal blog posts or external ones. So there's things that you can do to kind of bring your profile up, while actually kind of indoctrinating people a little bit more about what you do and why you do it. And eventually they're going to read things and go, oh, wow, that really makes sense. That's really interesting. I didn't know what they did. But, as an entry-level person in a big company, it's harder, I would say. As an entry-level person in a small company, you can do things that would have much more of an impact. Say, you know what, I'd like to speak to everybody for an hour about, how UCD works, or how UX works within Agile, or and it doesn't even have to be your work. You could do an hour on behavior change, but just kind of start getting people to think about things outside what they do, and then they start looking at you. Oh, that was the guy who told me about usability testing and what it brings to the table. I'm going to go talk to him. So it's about sort of I guess, disseminating information.
Great, thank you. Elijah says, thank you. Great advice to think about. Scrolling back to Lucas's question, can you talk about UX in artificial intelligence? How to express the importance of UX, though there may not be a visual design at the end? Yikes.
Yeah, okay. So this is a slightly out of my experience level. I haven't done anything in AI probably for over 20 years. So it wasn't really working like it is now then. Um, but I think, part of AI is when you have a system, any system, that's doing something behind the scenes, and you've got this interface with something and you don't understand why it's doing what it does, that is probably one of the most frustrating interactions you can have. Because when it does what you expect it to do, or it does the helpful thing, or it does the work you want it to do, that's great. When it doesn't, you don't know how to fix it. Yeah. So the capability for making errors and error recovery becomes quite great, and error recovery becomes really important. But if you have no interface, then how do you do that? And so with AI, it's going to be very difficult for people, particularly lay people that know nothing about this. They have no literacy at all in this, and this thing is doing something for them. And when it doesn't do what they think it should do, or it does something that they question, how do you manage that experience? If it does something that they should really be, it tells them they should really be doing something, and they don't want to do it because it doesn't seem right. How do you change that behavior? So it's just a minefield, I think, for UX. But I think thinking that you're not going to have UX in AI is kind of, I mean, just look at a chatbots, which are kind of really low levels of AI, and how frustrating they can be. Or anything like that, where you get caught in something and it just doesn't make sense. So that's kind of what you're looking for. So, in the movies, it doesn't do that. In real life, it does do that. And it's really frustrating. And people don't understand. I'll give you a good example. So this isn't really AI. We were asked...
So much isn't really AI.
I know. This isn't really AI. But we were given the task of designing dialogue for a robot. And when it came in, I was the only one who'd ever done speech and language stuff before. But to be fair, 15, 20 years before that. And we were looking at videos of how it was interacting. So, of course, it did this video, sort of a marketing video of it doing like a dating type thing. And it looked like it was doing language understanding. But actually, it was just speech recognition. So it kind of only understood yes or no. Like, you couldn't ask it a question. It had to ask you a question. And so it was really interesting how people thought when I was like, yeah, it's really smart. I'm going to be able to ask it like 3 questions at once, and it's going to come back. And I guess the perception was that this thing was going to be really smart because it looked smart. What was really cool about this little robot, besides it being very cute, it was extremely expressive around its eyes. It had lots of LEDs to do the eyes, and the way it moved. So it looked it had emotion. I mean, it was very cute. So it was kind of almost misdirecting people into thinking it was smart. And it wasn't smart. All it understood was yes and no. That was it. Yeah. So kind of, it's those kinds of situations where you fool people, and that becomes quite frustrating. So, and if you want to try it out, there's one in Amsterdam airport somewhere. It's not the one we did, but there is one there, and it's very frustrating.
Paul says, is it Chomsky yes or Chomsky no?
No, I don't know what that means. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Paul. You're on so many tangents today. Lucas says, thank you. Lucas says, I'm a new hire for a chatbot agency. I have been walking the minefield of UX and AI. Thank you for the insight.
Yeah. Good luck. I know you're going to do a great job.
Lucas, a great person for you to connect with is Chinu on LinkedIn. Srikant Chinu. I'll have to find his. I'll go find his link on LinkedIn. I'll post it into where you are in YouTube while Elisa answers the next question. But he's a good guy to know. He's in Texas, and as far as I know, he's Mr. Chatbot. So he could be a good guy to talk with. We have a question in YouTube from Abi, who I believe is asking if you have any particular advice for UX strategy when it's a smaller project that needs to be finished in a more strict time period.
Okay, so more strict time period in terms of, first understanding what the strategy is. So whenever you work on a project, you need to understand what your client's trying to achieve, or your stakeholders. What is it that users want to do with this thing? What is the benefit to them? What is the work they want to do? What are their requirements? And also the delivery. So how is it going to be delivered? So, and that delivery part, so like Deb's got her 3 circles in the back, I kind of do the 3 circles with, the business, the customer, and the delivery. And so in some cases, can that delivery be digital? Maybe it shouldn't be digital because your customer can't cope with that, or your client can't cope with it. So in some cases, clients will always say to us, oh, we want an app, we want a mobile app. And you explain to them how they have to manage it, and it has to be updated all the time. And then they're like, oh, no, we don't want an app.
Right.
But they always want an app, and then they die after 6 months or a year. And so it's understanding those 3 things, and strategically, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to achieve, in terms of delivery, that will match the requirements of both the customer and your stakeholder? But what's your how's your stakeholder going to measure success? How's your user going to measure, satisfaction with this thing? What's going to delight them? And then, in a quick project, you can look at, how to prioritize these things. So, you can do sort of, 80% with 20% of the probably functionality. But if it's a quick project, and it's a small budget, you need to be able to prioritize. So in that sense, when you have your strategy, that will help you derive the criteria around how am I going to select what's most important. So these are the things that my client wants to see. These are their priority things, and these are the things that my customers want to see. And so then I prioritize the things that I am going to deliver in that first version. And then, if it's a small, quick project, presumably there is the next version that comes after that. And then you can look at the other things, or actually, lots of times when you introduce change, it kind of changes that list, kind of morphs a little bit about what you want to do next. But it's really kind of understanding that what am I trying to achieve here for, from those 3 perspectives, and then prioritize those things into what can I actually achieve in terms of budget and time.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. I wanted to ask, while we wait for more live questions, when I think about what you said earlier with how we always need to find those allies and those sponsors, is there any particular role or department where you tend to feel like we have the most natural allies or sponsors?
Wow. Okay. So in every company, it's kind of different, so in some cases, I have just run a consultancy that's all UX people. So they're all UX researchers and designers. So we are, collaborating with people from the client. The ones that I think we find most naturally in line with us and understand what we do and what we don't do, and there's always a little bit of a shadowy overlap, is the teams that kind of execute digitally. So they will tend to understand our kind of side of the equation as well as theirs. And then there's a bit of a fuzzy bit in between with the UI developers and the UI designers, and then we've got the UX people and insight people and stuff like that. So there's this kind of natural sort of coming together because we understand each other's language, which is also quite important. I think when you go out a little bit more, It might take a little bit longer to win them over, but you have the more creative people who are doing more of the graphic design. So depending on where they come from, if they come from, cross or they're just sort of print media, then it's a little bit more difficult because you have to really work with them to understand a lot of conventions around digital. But I think those are the places where you kind of can collaborate quite easily. And there is overlap. So you just have to manage that overlap, I guess, and sort of it's like who does what. And sometimes it will change on a project because, UX person might be really busy, but the UI design guy is going to take what you've done and is going to do all the templates for you and is going to, build everything in. And so it just depends on how that works across individuals as well. But I think that's where you find the most, I guess, affinity is in those types of disciplines that are very closely related.
Thank you. Another thing I wanted to ask was, I've had a lot of conversations with people the last 2 years about UX evangelism, about how some people believe in UX evangelism. We have to keep holding meetings and showing PowerPoints about how great and important we are, and then they find that usually doesn't work or sometimes it backfires. Do you believe in UX evangelism? And if yes or no, how do we do this?
Okay, so I spent quite a lot of time doing this early on in my career. What really works is results. And you need to demonstrate, we did this and this and this. This was the benchmark before we started. This is the benchmark now, and it's working better. And however you manage, we talked about NPS scores. Don't use NPS scores, but we talked about those before. But measure what's happening. So you need to measure, and whether that measurement is going and talking to people internally because you've created some service that works internally to help your customer sort of then drive out to their customers. Go and talk to those people, find out if it's working better, actually get the feedback that you need, but also count. So one of the things that we do is understanding what quantitative measure that you can collect with Google Analytics or whatever that will represent a normally qualitatively measured behavior or experience.
Such as?
I'll give you an example. This is my simplest example. So if you have a website that is for a particular therapeutic area, and what you want is, you have a new novel drug on the market, and what you want is, you can't actually advertise that, but what you want is for people with this disease to go and speak to their doctor and talk to them about the new novel drugs. So yours and your competitors, whatever, but you want them to go and speak about this new novel drug. So you put on your website a tool, which is a downloadable list of questions to bring to your doctor. So what the client wants is for people to go and see their physician and ask them about these new novel drugs. Now, there's lots of questions in there that are not just about the new novel drugs, but other things that are also quite useful. So every time that's downloaded, then the expectation is that they will be going to see their doctor. Now, you can't check to see that, but when you have created content and a journey that leads them to, here's a national conclusion. I have this disease. I need to take care of myself. There's things I can do. There's new novel drugs on the market. Maybe I'll go see my doctor. This is a good idea because now I feel more confident because the content has given me the information to be able to talk to my doctor. So it's a little bit stretching it, but as an example, I think that if these people are downloading this questions to take to your doctor, that they're going to speak to their doctor. And that's what I want. So that's how I can measure the success. So it's not just visits. It's not just, it's trying to get something a little bit more substantial that you can kind of, get your fists around and say, look, this is what we've done and this is what's happening. So it's kind of a simple example, but it's probably the the best one to give, but it's, what is it you want to measure, and what behavior that you can count is related to that in some way, shape, or form. It's not a perfect science, but it's better than just counting visits.
Right, or page views, or time on page, or some some of these other things that we've already said are either vanity metrics or meaningless.
Well, time on page means nothing. It
Right.
means absolutely nothing. You don't
Well,
know if that was a
it can
success
mean
or a
they're
failure.
yeah, right. They can mean they're lost and they don't know what they're doing and they're stuck.
Yeah, yeah.
So can't count that. We are live. We've got a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions or thoughts for our fantastic guest, please put them in the chat rooms. I'm monitoring both chat rooms. I'm trying to think of what else. You and I, when we talked before this, we had endless horror stories, and now we're probably not even allowed to tell some of those stories on the air because we don't want to name anybody's names. But thinking back about how we get that seat at the table, how do we, thinking about the dysfunctional teams that you've dealt with, how do we deal with some of the more fragile egos from some of the teammates who are like, oh my God, UX is here to take my job? I've worked with a couple of companies as a consultant where the business analysts love to interview customers, or the engineers like to interview customers, and the product managers like to sketch screens, and then we get hired, and now it's Hatfields and McCoys. There's conflict because, oh my God, they're taking my job. Is there anything specifically we can do in our strategy or in our presentation to try to reassure those people that, yes, we're shifting, but it's not the end of the world?
So a couple things. One is the kind of the 80% heads, 20% hands kind of approach, so that they understand that you're not just sketching a screen. There's a lot of stuff that comes before that, to actually, before you put something down on paper. There is a lot of thinking and a lot of foundational knowledge and experience before you even draw the line on the paper that helps you get there. I think, if you have an organization where UX is coming in completely new, it's hard. It's really hard. I have been, in my career, I have been the only one, and can be really good, can be really horrid. Don't give up. I think that you need to pick your battles. So if someone wants to do research, then maybe sit down with them and say, can I maybe help you? Can I look at some of the questions you're asking? Maybe I could add some questions. Maybe I could do a couple and you could watch me and we could see if we can make this a little bit better. Because very often people don't understand how we ask questions, and that they're very often looking for the much more quant perspective, which is, what are people doing? What are they doing? What are they doing?
Do you like this? Yes, no.
Yeah. And we're always like, tell me why. I want to know why. It's like we're why junkies and we're feedback junkies. I need to know why. What's driving this behavior? What's motivating you? What's blocking, your ability to do this? And so the more that you engage with these people, go to lunch with them, talk about, the research that you've done before and how it, the implications that it had for design. Bring them into your world. It's this, there's no fast solution. Find your allies, build up your team around you. And when I say team, I'm kind of saying, the team of people that understand what you do and want to work with you. But it is really hard. I'm not going to say that it's not hard. I've been through it. It's really difficult. And even coming in as a very senior consultant, that kind of helps. But it's still difficult. When they're paying you, on a daily rate, and you're coming in and you're like supposed to be telling everybody, you get a little bit more attention, but it's still not that great. Lots of times you do the big report. I've spent 18 months working for a client, going to, I can't even remember how many countries we worked in. And I know that report never went anywhere. we redesigned everything, we delivered everything, we delivered all the research, it was like 7 languages, and it went nowhere. It went on somebody's desk because it was their baby and they weren't going to change it. So it happens. You just you need to know when to fight your battles and when to move on.
Yeah, and I'll also remind people that when you're just starting out in UX, you probably don't yet know when to pick your battles or how to pick your battles. So you might need some senior help or mentor or coach help to figure out what's worth fighting for and what isn't. Let's see. Let's see. Abby in YouTube says, if time can't be quantified, how should we be able to justify an e-commerce portal selling N numbers of product when users are searching? Because if users lost in searching, it's not a problem worth exploring. I'm not too sure what the question is in there. What did you get from that?
Okay. So if you've got an e-commerce situation, foundational research says if they're in a good mood, they will browse more. And so they might really like the way your site looks. They like the way it's organized, and they're browsing around and they're searching. If you're in a bad mood, or you're upset, or you're, kind of a bit, say you're donating money for some disaster relief, you go in and you come out. You're in a bad mood, you go in, you get what you want, and you come out. So it's very hard to kind of, understand what that time means. But if you have a goal, so my goal is that I want people to put more items in their basket, or to have a higher value in their basket, because more items isn't necessarily a higher value. I want people to return, visit, and be realistic about that. Maybe it's once a month, maybe it's twice a year, but whatever you're selling. But have sort of realistic ideas about what the time is. But I think, the other thing is you do your research with people and understand, I only come here, twice a year, but this is the only place I buy this type of product because this is great. I love it, and this is kind of going against the, the NPS stuff is, why are people coming? If I only, if this is my choice, to come to this place and that's good. It doesn't matter that I only spend 15 minutes on the site. What matters is that I'm a loyal customer and I will always come back. So some people come more. So it's really, you can look at the pattern of people's behavior and how they're searching around, but searching around as just a browsing and entertaining yourself is probably okay, because you might find something you want to buy. But that behavior could also be someone searching for something they can't find. So this is the problem with looking at these types of measurements is that good behavior or is that bad behavior? So you've got to know the why. And if you can, by sort of getting some of the why, and then relate that back to maybe little intricacies about how they search. And so this pattern of behavior is a good pattern of behavior, and this pattern of behavior is not so good, then maybe that will work a bit better. But, particularly in e-commerce, you have to have a goal. Do I want to upsell? Do I want to cross-sell? And really understanding how behavior works and where you would put that into the mix. Because if you try to cross-sell or upsell too soon, you lose the whole basket. If you do it at the right time, it works well. If you do it too late, it's too late. So it's really understanding behavior, I think, in how you are designing that would help you more than probably measuring stuff, if that makes sense. So the foundational stuff is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Abby says, you understood, thank you. No, thank you, Abby. I'm glad she got it.
Thanks, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. I'm a little sleepy today. So knowing we only have a few minutes left, I wanted to, first of all, let's let everybody know how they can find you. Are you LinkedInable? Are you a tweeter? Where can everybody find you?
Yeah, I don't tweet too often anymore, but I am on Twitter. But probably best to message me through LinkedIn. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. There's, loads of stuff about me on LinkedIn. If you want to see any of the stuff that I've written, If you just Google my name, a lot of the blog posts and things that I've written coming up, I'm in the process. So I, I haven't actually been employed since April, which is quite funny, but I have finally just written my CV. And one of the things that I'm working on is trying to get all of my academic papers and all of my blog posts and everything in one place. So that'll be, there'll be a link to that on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. So
Eventually. I'm
please
almost there.
find Elisa Delgado on LinkedIn. And with our last few minutes, unless we get a question, or is there anything else you wanted to add that we haven't mentioned that can really help UX or CX get that seat at the table, which I know comes back to respect and so many other things?
I think what what I tend to do, and this is, I'm not trying to be discouraging to anybody, but what I tend to do is I tend to hire people who have both an academic background in research and design. I find that it makes it easier for them to work and communicate and transpose the implications from their insight to the implications of design and be able to do that. I think if you are, if you've done boot camps and all sorts of other stuff, you will find it difficult to argue a point about a fundamental issue about design unless you really understand. If you can get up and talk about Gestalt and why something should be next to something else and shouldn't be next to something else, or, motion blindness or Yerkes Dodson or whatever, if you can do that, you're there. Because no one can say, well, my opinion is,
but I like this.
No,
yeah.
Yeah, I can't do that. So the more you educate yourself about the foundational stuff, I know people say, oh my God, they're so academic and all this, but that foundational underpinning of your profession is really, really important. And whether you get it, through yourself, doing your own, kind of reading books, studying yourself, or going to graduate school, or whatever it is, it's really important, because you will not have the gravitas that you need to make that impact and have that seat at the table.
And do you recommend any books? Are there any books you have that are favorites that you would recommend to the audience?
Okay, I'm looking at my bookshelf at the moment. God, there are just hundreds, back from all my, kind of human factors and ergonomics books to, I'm looking at Handbook of Usability Testing, designing and, writing online documentation. I'm just looking at, environmental and human efficiency. I mean, all these things are really important. There's another one here, is Infographic Designer Sketchbook. I'm just looking at all my books here. There's loads about internationalization. There is loads about a lot of stuff about behavior change. So habit, influence. Yes, those are really good books around looking at how we change and influence behavior. I'm looking at one right in front of me called, Human Factors in Engineering and Design. I mean, these are really old books. This is from 30 years ago.
But they're probably still relevant.
Well, they're still relevant because we, as humans, we don't actually evolve that quickly. So a lot of that stuff is kind of the same. I mean, my laptop is sitting on the Human Factors Design Handbook, which has kind of outdated itself because it was based on men in the U.S. military. So everybody's really tall.
And very fit.
Yeah, very fit. But there are so many good books out there. And I think that, but there are a lot of books that just repeat the same stuff. There's loads of service design books out there, which they're interesting, but for me, I'm like, it's not really that different what we do. It's just understanding that, again, it's the context of what you're doing within a service design. Who's your audience? You have a bigger audience. It's a bigger pipeline. It's more actors, but the process isn't different. But, what are you focusing? I mean, if you're, looking at speech and language stuff or chatbots, there's loads of research papers out there. Read research papers. They're hard to read, but eventually you get the gist of it. I find now that I don't read them all the time anymore. They are hard to read, I'll admit. But you can get some great stuff out of it, So, be voracious readers. Talk to your friends. Go to networking events. then you will start to build up more and more information and more of that kind of academic stuff.
Excellent, excellent. And we should end with Paul, who is evidently your new biggest fan, says, "This woman is brilliant. Someone needs to hire her now."
Thank you, Paul.
I agree with both. So in that case, I guess we will wind down because, believe it or not, we've burned through an hour.
We have. Oh my goodness. Yes.
I know. Time flies when
quick.
when you're on the Delta CX podcast. So again, please subscribe on YouTube, share with friends, and remember, everything is archived in the YouTube channel so that you can watch this whenever you like, and including at 2x speed. It also will be going out tomorrow on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and Spotify for those who like the audio-only version, which is part of why we spell names. So I'm Debbie Levitt from Delta CX. Special thanks to Elisa. Thank you so much for joining.
Deb.
And
really enjoyed it.
me too. We will have to come up with another topic to dissect
Absolutely.
and devour. Hope to see you again. Everybody be well. Please join tomorrow for Office Hours Ask Me Anything, when you can ask me anything. And on that note, I will play us out of here. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Deb. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.